Imagine you finally win the lottery of history.
Oh, right, like you finally get what you've been fighting for.
Exactly. For decades, maybe even centuries, the whole operating system of your country has been hard-coded to benefit, just a tiny select few.
Yeah, the elites. And everyone else is just locked out.
Completely excluded. But then, one day, the system actually cracks. A monumental shift happens.
You finally get the right to vote.
Right. After decades of brutal oppression, the gates are thrown open. Equality is finally on the horizon.
It sounds like a fairy tale ending.
It does. But your reward for this historic triumph, the total spectacular collapse of your country's economy.
Yeah, that is the brutal reality.
The currency disintegrates, hyperinflation obliterates your savings, and the poorest citizens end up suffering even more than they did under the dictatorship.
It's just a completely jarring reality to confront.
Why does the pursuit of equality almost always begin with a catastrophe? That is what we are looking at today.
Right, because we naturally assume the path to justice is just a straight line.
We do. We definitely don't expect the pursuit of basic fairness to pass directly through a financial apocalypse.
But historically, that is often exactly what happens.
So welcome to today's deep dive. We are doing an autopsy of how a nation's social contract actually changes in the real world.
Yeah, decoding the sort of under-the-hood mechanics of redistributing wealth and power.
We're unpacking a really fascinating National Bureau of Economic Research paper. It's by Alston, Marcus Melo, Bernardo Mueller, and Carlos Pereira.
And it focuses on the really violent, messy transition of Brazil over the last 40 years.
But I want to make this clear right off the bat. This is not just a history lesson about South America.
Oh, far from it. The paper uses Brazil as, well, basically a laboratory.
Right, to dismantle some of the most deeply held assumptions in economics and political science.
Yeah, it challenges everything we think we know about what poor voters actually want.
And it explains why a little bit of bureaucratic waste might actually save a democracy.
Which is a wild concept. It really exposes the invisible forces holding our own societies together.
So if you're listening to this and you look around your own neighborhood, do you ever feel like the fundamental rules are just broken?
Like who gets what, who pays what.
Yeah, and that it feels completely impossible to change. Well, this dive will show you exactly what it takes to tear up those rules and write new ones.
And fair warning, the true cost of that kind of systemic change is incredibly steep.
It really is. So let's start with a hook from the paper that absolutely floored me.
Oh, the voting paradox.
Yes. In an incredibly unequal society, where the vast majority of people are living in poverty, why do those poor majorities continually vote for leaders and policies that keep them poor?
It makes no sense on the surface. To understand it, we have to look at what political scientists have been teaching for, decades.
Which is the median voter theory, right?
Right, the median voter theory. It assumes that in a democracy, the median voter, the person sitting exactly in the middle of the income distribution, is the decisive voice.
Okay, so if a country is highly unequal, that median voter is poor.
Exactly. Therefore, basic academic logic dictates that this poor median voter will simply vote to tax the rich.
And just redistribute the wealth to themselves.
Right. That's the theory.
Wait, I have to push back on that because that sounds completely logical to me.
It does sound logical.
Like if there are 10 people in a room and one person has $100 and the other 9 have $1 each.
Yeah, those 9 people are absolutely going to vote to split the $100.
Right. So are you saying the data proves people actively vote against their own self-interest?
I am saying the theoretical room of 10 people does not operate like a real-world democracy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the researchers analyzed data across multiple countries and proved that the median voter theory just essentially collapses.
Collapses when applied to highly unequal societies.
Precisely. Highly unequal countries do not automatically redistribute more wealth.
So what's the fatal flaw in my 10-person room analogy?
The flaw is assuming that every vote carries the exact same weight in shaping actual policy.
Ah. So one person, one vote is basically a myth.
On paper, everyone gets a vote. But in the mechanics of policymaking, the reality leans much closer to $1, one vote.
$1, one vote. That is bleak.
It is. Wealth translates directly into political influence. The wealthy do not just sit back and let the median voter draft tax legislation.
Right, they use their resources.
Exactly. They fund campaigns, they purchase media networks to control the narrative.
They hire the lobbyists to write the loopholes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the voices at the very bottom, despite being the numerical majority, face this impenetrable wall.
Their votes just rarely translate into systemic policy changes because the whole architecture is funded by the elite.
Right.
It's like the wealthy have a massive stadium-grade megaphone, and the poor are just whispering from the back row.
That's a great way to put it. But the paper doesn't just stop at saying the rich block the poor.
Right. It introduces this mathematical model that completely blew my mind.
The U-shaped curve.
Yes, the researchers map out the relationship between inequality and the willingness of a society to fix it.
And it forms a literal U-shape.
It's a fascinating dynamic. So imagine a graph. The vertical axis is the public's support for redistributing wealth.
And the horizontal axis is the actual level of inequality.
Right. Now, intuition tells us this should just be a straight line pointing up.
Yeah, you'd think as inequality gets worse, the demand to fix it would rise right along with it.
But it doesn't.
Yeah.
It forms this bizarre U-shape.
Right.
Let's trace it, because I think this explains a lot about the gridlock we see in the world today.
Let's do it.
On the far left of the graph, inequality is very low. Society is relatively equal.
And surprisingly, support for redistribution, like high taxes for public services, is actually quite high.
But wait, why do people in an equal society want even more redistribution? They're already equal.
Because in that specific environment, redistribution feels like an investment rather than a penalty.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, when society is relatively equal, using tax dollars to fund public education or universal health care actually grows the economic pie for everyone.
So the public supports it because they see the mutual benefit.
Right, the benefit of a highly educated, healthy workforce.
But then we slide down into the valley of the U-shape.
The danger zone.
This is where inequality becomes moderate to high. The gap between the rich and the poor is really widening.
And paradoxically, support for actually fixing the problem hits rock bottom.
Which is so counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Why does a society suddenly give up on reform right when the problem is getting visibly worse?
Well, that valley is basically the mathematical proof of human stubbornness.
Oh, so?
In a society with moderate to high inequality, the wealthy elite have accumulated enough resources to push back with maximum force.
Because they realize any meaningful redistribution is going to cost them heavily?
Exactly. And to understand their resistance, we have to talk about a concept economists call dead weight loss.
Okay, let's break that down without the jargon. What is a dead weight loss in the real world?
Think of wealth redistribution like using a bucket to carry water from a wealthy person's swimming pool to a poor person's empty glass.
Okay, I'm picturing the bucket. The bucket is the government's tax and welfare system,
Right. But the bucket is inherently leaky. Water spills out.
What causes the leaks?
Bureaucratic administrative costs, tax evasion, outright corruption.
And the fact that high taxes might disincentivize some people from working as hard.
Exactly. That spilled water, the economic value that just vanishes into thin air during the transfer, that is the dead weight loss.
Okay, I'm with you. The leaky bucket.
So in that valley of the U-shape, the rich argue that the bucket is so incredibly leaky that redistribution will just ruin the whole economy.
So they fight it tooth and nail.
Yeah, and they are willing to tolerate massive societal decay.
Crumbling infrastructure, underfunded schools, rising crime.
Right, they'll tolerate all of that just to avoid giving up their slice of the pie.
The political friction is just so intense that the system completely gridlocks.
The poor push for change, the rich push back harder, and absolutely nothing gets done.
So if you are listening to this right now in a Western democracy, and you feel like your political system is hopelessly frozen,
You're probably trapped at the very bottom of that U-shaped valley.
but this raises a really dark question.
Yeah.
How do you get out of the valley?
It's not easy.
Do things have to get unimaginably bad before human beings will actually agree to share?
That brings us to the right side of the U-shape. To climb out of the valley, inequality has to push past moderate.
It has to become absolutely extreme.
Right. The mathematical dynamic shifts again. The society reaches a literal breaking point.
Like a total breakdown.
Yes, the system becomes so incredibly dysfunctional that the threat of total social collapse or widespread violence or even revolution
Finally outweighs the cost of higher taxes for the rich.
Exactly. It is only at the absolute extreme edge of the curve that society finally breaks the deadlock.
Wow. So the status quo finally becomes more expensive than the reform.
The rich realize, if I don't give up 30% of my wealth in taxes, the mob is going to take 100% of my wealth and burn down my house.
That is terrifying.
It's the underlying logic, though it rarely plays out quite that cleanly.
Right. It requires a massive structural shock to knock a country out of that gridlock.
And that is incredibly rare.
Yeah, the data on this in the paper is a real wake-up call. The paper looks at Gini coefficients.
which is just the standard scale from 0 to 1, measuring how unequal a country's income is.
Right. It plots the U.S. and Europe over decades, and the lines are practically flat.
Yeah, cross-national data proves that social contracts are virtually frozen in time.
For 30 or 40 years, the U.S. remains a high inequality, low redistribution system, and Europe remains a low inequality, high redistribution system.
The dots on the chart barely move.
Because social contracts are deeply entrenched in a nation's DNA, right?
Absolutely. They're built on historical foundations and legal frameworks that are just inherently resistant to change.
Take the United States, for example. The U.S. Constitution was explicitly designed with heavy checks and balances.
Partly to protect property rights against what the founders feared as the tyranny of the majority.
So that architectural DNA makes it incredibly difficult to fundamentally rewrite the American social contract centuries later.
It does, which makes Brazil such a fascinating case study.
Right. If these contracts are practically etched in stone, what was the secret weapon Brazil used to completely tear up its old contract without a bloody revolution?
To understand that, we have to travel back to what the paper calls the Brazilian miracle.
Which ran roughly from 1964 to 1974.
And this period was orchestrated by a military dictatorship.
Right, which is absolutely crucial to understand because it sets the baseline for everything that follows.
During this decade, the military government achieved massive, explosive economic growth.
We're talking about GDP growth rates routinely hitting 10 or 11% a year.
Yeah, vastly outpacing the global average.
So from a purely macroeconomic spreadsheet perspective, it looked like an absolute triumph.
But the paper reveals this growth was a trap.
A trap built on silent exploitation.
Exactly. The military government operated on a rigid economic philosophy they called developmentalism.
And the core tenet of developmentalism was terrifyingly simple. Grow the pie first, share it later.
And in practice, later meant never.
Right.
Developmentalism dictated that rapid economic growth and industrialization were the supreme overriding goals of the state.
So social concerns, poverty, political participation, human rights, they were just ignored.
Worse than ignored. They were viewed as dangerous, inefficient distractions.
No.
The regime actively suppressed the minimum wage, they crushed labor unions, and heavily censored the press.
All to ensure that absolutely nothing stood in the way of capital accumulation.
Right. It was highly efficient, but it was an extractive efficiency.
It's like trying to build a gorgeous, towering skyscraper, but you're using explosives for the foundation.
That's a perfect analogy.
You know, sure, the higher you build, the more impressive it looks, but the bigger the inevitable blast is going to be.
Exactly. Why is the period of a country's most glorious economic growth exactly the starting point of its eventual collapse?
Because a growing pie that entirely excludes the bottom creates a ticking social time bomb.
The military regime generated massive wealth, but the mechanism for distributing that wealth was intentionally broken.
So what happened when the global economic shocks of the late 1970s hit, like the oil crisis?
The Brazilian economic engine started to sputter. And when that stellar economic performance faded,
The reality of the situation set in.
yeah, the absolute horror of the political oppression, the lack of freedom, and the staggering poverty became impossible to ignore.
The unpaid engineers finally revolted.
By 1984, you have millions of people pouring into the streets demanding direct elections.
It wasn't a violent civil war, but it was a massive collective societal catharsis.
The people realized the system was a scam, and they demanded a new board of directors.
Which leads us to the transition back to democracy in a moment that completely defies common sense.
Yeah, 1985, the military finally steps down, democracy returns.
And there is this overwhelming, almost intoxicating public desire to right the wrongs of the past 2 decades.
The belief in developmentalism growth at all costs is violently rejected.
And in its place, a new national belief surges. Immediate social inclusion.
The people basically say, we are building a new society where everyone gets a slice of the pie from day one.
And in 1988, they ratify a brand new constitution to guarantee it.
The 1988 Constitution.
Reading about this document, it sounds like a progressive utopian dream. It hands out sweeping social rights.
Guarantees universal health care, public education, robust labor protections.
It radically expands the voting franchise, suddenly allowing illiterates to vote, which immediately enfranchised 25% of the population.
Is a beautiful, deeply democratic document designed specifically to protect the poor.
But economically speaking,
It was an unmitigated disaster.
okay, explain that to me. How did a beautiful constitution, designed specifically to protect the poor, cause them to lose absolutely everything overnight?
Because the 1988 Constitution mandated massive, immediate social inclusion, but it completely ignored the math of how to pay for it.
Oh, no.
Yeah. The newly democratic government was suddenly legally obligated to double its social spending. Double it. But they didn't have the tax infrastructure, the bureaucratic efficiency, or the actual economic output to support that massive outflow of cash.
So what does a government do when it has to pay for things it legally cannot afford, and it can't borrow the money on international markets?
It turns to the printing press.
They just started printing money.
They simply printed money to pay their legal obligations.
And the inevitable result of printing money to cover massive structural deficits.
Hyperinflation.
We hear the word inflation a lot today. People get understandably upset when groceries go up 8 or 10% in a year.
But we need to look at the data in this paper to understand what happened here.
Yeah, the paper highlights an era where annual inflation hit 1,050%.
We really need to pause and contextualize what 1,050% hyperinflation actually means for daily human existence.
Right. It means the concept of money completely breaks down.
Prices aren't changing by the week, they're changing by the hour.
I was reading accounts of this period, and it is surreal. If you get paid your monthly salary on a Friday morning, and you wait until Monday to buy your groceries,
Your money might have lost 20 or 30% of its purchasing power over the weekend.
people would literally sprint to the supermarket the minute they received their paychecks.
Just to buy anything before the price went up again.
Yeah, store clerks had these little pricing guns, and their entire job was just walking up and down the aisles, continuously stamping higher prices on the cans of beans throughout the day.
It is a profound psychological trauma for an entire society.
And here is the brutal irony, the absolute tragedy of this era. Who suffers the most during hyperinflation?
It isn't the wealthy elite.
Wait, why not? If money is losing its value, shouldn't the people with the most money lose the most?
Not at all, because the wealthy don't keep their wealth in cash under a mattress. During this period in Brazil, the wealthy had access to sophisticated banking mechanisms.
Right.
They used what were called overnight accounts. The bank would automatically sweep their cash into high-yield government bonds overnight to index against inflation,
Right.
and then sweep it back into usable cash the next morning. They also moved their wealth into foreign currencies like the US dollar or into hard assets like real estate.
So their wealth was shielded.
Completely shielded. But the poorest citizens, the exact people the 1988 Constitution was written to empower, they were entirely unbanked.
They dealt exclusively in physical cash.
Exactly. For the poor, that physical cash was a melting ice cube in their pockets.
That's devastating.
Hyperinflation acts as the most vicious, highly regressive tax imaginable. It targets the people who have the least ability to evade it.
The paper makes this incredibly clear. Giving people sweeping rights on paper without anchoring those rights in fiscal reality destroys the very people you are trying to help.
You can mandate equality all you want, but if you break the currency to achieve it, the poor bear the absolute brunt of the pain.
It's the ultimate be careful what you wish for scenario. They demanded immediate inclusion, they got it, and it nearly wiped them off the map.
It's a profound lesson in the mechanics of the social contract.
A national social contract is essentially a balance sheet, isn't it?
Yes. You cannot infinitely increase the liabilities, the promises of healthcare, education, pensions, without generating the assets and productivity to cover them.
The Brazilian state took on infinite social liabilities, and when the math failed, the currency collapsed.
But that leaves a massive psychological puzzle.
Right. If you spend 10 years watching your money evaporate, sprinting to the grocery store, living in constant financial anxiety, how do you ever trust a government to build a fair society again?
Exactly.
How did a decade of devastating financial disaster somehow become the strongest foundation for modern social stability?
Because trauma rewrites the collective psychology of a nation.
And this is where the paper takes a massive swing at traditional economic modeling, right?
It really does. Mainstream economists have spent decades ignoring the concept of societal beliefs.
They love to build models that treat human beings like perfectly rational calculators.
Right, optimizing their utility based on objective spreadsheets. Economists hate the word belief because you can't put it in an Excel cell.
But the authors of this paper rely on Nobel-level insights, like those of Thrain Egerton, to prove that shifting what a society fundamentally believes is the only way to move a country from a high inequality state to a low inequality state.
You can't just change the tax code. You have to change what people believe is true about the world.
And hyperinflation completely changed what Brazilians believed.
It burned a profound existential fear into the collective psyche of the nation.
So in 1994, the government finally implements the real plan.
Right, introducing a new currency, the real.
And it successfully stabilizes the economy and kills the hyperinflation dragon.
And in that moment of stabilization, a new national religion is born. The authors call it fiscally sound social inclusion.
This is the turning point to the entire narrative, isn't it?
It is. The trauma of the military dictatorship made social inclusion an absolute non-negotiable mandate.
The Brazilian people would never again accept an elitist society that said, grow first, share later.
But simultaneously, the trauma of the 1980s hyperinflation made fiscal responsibility an absolute mandate.
They would never again accept a populist government that recklessly printed money.
These two seemingly contradictory beliefs, we must share the wealth, but we must rigorously balance the checkbook they locked together.
Into a single, unbreakable dual mandate.
They formed a new institutional reality. And it wasn't just a political slogan for one party.
It became the water everyone swam in.
Exactly. Whether a left-wing president or a right-wing president was in power, they were completely bound by this dual mandate.
If a politician ignored social inclusion, the voters threw them out because they feared a return to authoritarian exclusion.
And if a politician ignored inflation targets, the voters threw them out because they feared a return to the melting ice cube economy.
It's like the nation touched two incredibly hot stoves, authoritarian exclusion on the right and hyperinflationary populism on the left. And the burns were so severe, they absolutely refused to ever go near either one again.
That's exactly what happened.
But believing in a fair, balanced society is one thing. Actually executing it. That brings us to the absolute core concept of this entire NBER paper.
The magic and the incredible mess of dissipative inclusion.
Dissipative inclusion.
Yes.
It sounds like academic jargon, but it is so vital.
It describes how you practically transition from a broken, unequal society to a fairer one in the real, unforgiving world.
Let's break the term down. Dissipative. Dissipation is what happens when energy is lost as heat in a machine, right?
Exactly. When you run a car engine, you don't want it to get hot. You want all the energy to go toward turning the wheels.
But the laws of physics dictate that friction will generate heat.
And that heat is wasted energy. It's dissipation. In an economy, dissipation is the friction, the political gridlock, the bureaucratic waste, the rent-seeking.
All of the loss of pure economic efficiency that occurs when you try to change the rules.
Right. And the inclusion part is obvious, bringing the excluded masses into the economy.
So let's test this concept. Why is a broken, corrupt, highly inefficient reform still vastly superior to a perfectly planned, hyper-efficient system that never actually happens?
Because the perfectly planned, frictionless reform is a total fantasy.
Right.
In the real world, redistributing power and wealth is inherently messy and fiercely contested.
When a government tries to include millions of previously marginalized people, the elites don't just surrender quietly.
They fight back. They demand political buy-offs. They throw up endless bureaucratic roadblocks.
They make the process as painful as possible.
Yes, and that resistance creates massive friction. The brilliance of the Brazilian model, dissipative inclusion, is recognizing that waste and inefficiency are the inescapable toll you have to pay.
To cross the bridge from an extractive regime to an inclusive one, the waste is the price of peace.
Let's look at the specific case studies the paper highlights because they are just mind-blowing.
Okay, case study 1, land reform. The goal was classic wealth redistribution.
Right. Take massive, historically unproductive estates owned by wealthy elites and redistribute them to landless peasants so they can farm and survive.
The deeply noble goal. But look at how it actually played out on the ground.
The scale is staggering.
Over the course of a couple of decades, the government successfully redistributed an astonishing 87 million hectares of land to 900,000 poor families.
Just visualize that map. 87 million hectares is an area of land larger than the entirety of Portugal and France combined.
Systematically handed over to the poorest citizens. You hear that and you think, wow, what a flawless historic victory for human equality.
But the paper details the horrific friction involved.
This massive redistribution was accompanied by 18,000 violent rural conflicts and 1,200 deaths.
Over 1,000 people murdered over property lines.
That is incredibly bloody.
The process was violent, chaotic, and heavily contested in every possible arena. Landowners hired private militias, peasants organized mass squatting movements.
The court systems were jammed for years with complex legal battles.
And from a purely macroeconomic standpoint, the agricultural output of some of these redistributed lands actually plummeted initially.
Wait, why did crop yields drop if the land was finally being used?
Because giving a poor family a plot of land does not automatically make them highly efficient commercial farmers.
Right.
The new owners didn't have access to credit to buy tractors, they didn't have high-yield seeds, and they lacked agricultural training.
So from the perspective of an economist looking only at a spreadsheet, the land reform was wildly inefficient.
Deeply traumatic and a failure of optimal resource allocation.
It still fundamentally counts as a massive successful inclusion.
Because those 900,000 families actually got the land. The generational wealth was legally redistributed.
The old social contract, which said the elite own everything forever, was physically bulldozed and rewritten.
And that is the crux of dissipative inclusion. It proves that you cannot evaluate systemic change purely on an efficiency spreadsheet.
If the government had demanded a bloodless, 100% efficient, perfectly legal land reform,
they would have gotten exactly 0 hectares redistributed.
the friction, the legal battles, even the tragic violence that was the agonizing cost of doing business with history.
Exactly. Let's look at case study 2, which deals with something a bit more mundane but equally crucial.
Participatory councils.
Right. As part of the new inclusive mindset, the 1988 Constitution mandated that regular citizens get a direct voice in how government budgets are spent.
Especially at the local and municipal levels. It sounds incredibly democratic. Power to the people. Let the neighborhood decide where the money goes.
It sounds wonderful in theory, but in practice, what does giving everybody a voice actually look like?
It looks like endless, exhausting bickering.
I mean, have you ever been to a local town hall meeting?
Oh yes, it's rough.
The paper examines these participatory councils and finds that trying to achieve consensus among wildly different community groups slows decision-making to an absolute crawl.
Infrastructure projects, building a new clinic, paving a road, get delayed for years, while communities argue over the exact placement of a bus stop.
Or which neighborhood deserves the funding first.
So I have to play devil's advocate here. If it's a bureaucratic nightmare that delays building hospitals, why not just hire a highly educated, efficient technocrat, put them in an office, and let them make the optimal decision in 5 minutes?
Because that efficient technocrat sitting alone in an office is precisely how the military dictatorship operated. And it led directly to silent exploitation and massive corruption. The endless bickering of the participatory councils is a feature, not a bug.
By forcing the budgetary process out into the open, by making everyone argue in public, you create transparency.
And that transparency acts as a powerful structural wedge against historic corruption.
I see. Under the old, highly efficient system, a corrupt mayor could just award a $1 million paving contract to his brother-in-law behind closed doors in a matter of seconds.
Highly efficient, but highly corrupt.
The new system is incredibly slow, deeply annoying, and administratively heavy. But the brother-in-law doesn't get the contract anymore.
The dissipation, the loss of speed and bureaucratic efficiency buys you the inclusion and the transparency.
It's not a pretty process, but it slowly dismantles entrenched corruption.
Which brings us to one of the most hotly debated economic policies of the entire era.
A minimum wage.
Yeah.
Because this is where the paper shows a complete reversal of conventional economic logic.
Right. In the pursuit of inclusion, the Brazilian government set up a formula that artificially skyrocketed the minimum wage.
In 2012 alone, they raised it by 13% in a single year.
Now, any first-year economics textbook will tell you that if a government artificially spikes the cost of labor by 17% overnight,
We will destroy the private sector. Businesses will mass fire workers, unemployment will spike, and the economy will crater.
that is the standard tax distortion argument. The theory is that if you make labor too expensive, the market breaks, and the very people you are trying to help lose their jobs.
But the paper's data shows that in this specific context, that disaster did not happen.
It didn't happen at all.
Instead, it sparked an economic boom that fundamentally altered the demographics of the entire country. How is that possible?
Walk me through the mechanism. Why didn't a 13% hike destroy small businesses?
Well, to understand why it worked, you have to look at the brilliant formula they used, and you have to understand the velocity of money.
Okay, let's start with the formula.
First, the formula tied the annual minimum wage adjustment to the previous year's inflation rate, plus the country's GDP growth from 2 years prior.
So it guaranteed that as the overall country grew wealthier, The absolute poorest workers got a mandatory raise that mathematically beat inflation.
Exactly. It was an automatic stabilizer. Now let's talk about the velocity of money.
This is key.
If you give $1,000 in tax cuts to a multimillionaire, what do they do with it?
They likely park it in an offshore investment account or buy a stock. The money just sits there.
Right. The velocity, how fast that dollar moves through the local economy is incredibly low. But what happens when you mandate a significant raise for a desperately poor worker?
They spend it immediately because they have to.
Precisely. They don't buy offshore bonds. They buy a refrigerator. They buy new shoes for their kids.
They buy meat instead of just rice.
They are forced entirely into the local consumer market. So when the minimum wage spiked, millions of poor workers suddenly had disposable income.
They flooded the local stores.
The local appliance store saw a massive spike in demand, so the owner didn't fire workers. They hired more workers to keep up with the demand.
The velocity of money skyrocketed, creating a localized economic multiplier effect.
The results are literally chart-breaking. The paper tracks the demographic shift, and it's like watching a society transform overnight.
The bottom economic tiers, what the researchers call Class D and E, shrank from 63% of the population down to just 33% in under 2 decades.
They almost halved extreme poverty.
Meanwhile, the middle class, Class C, exploded from 31% to 55%.
They doubled the size of the middle class.
It was a golden reshuffling of the bottom of the pyramid.
By increasing the minimum wage and implementing massive targeted cash transfer programs like Bolsa Familia, they didn't destroy the economy.
They built a massive, sustainable internal consumer engine.
But wait, I have to stop you there, because the paper introduces a jaw-dropping paradox that we absolutely must address.
Oh, the growth paradox.
Yes. If they eradicated extreme poverty, doubled the middle class, and built this massive, thriving consumer engine, why did the overall economic growth of the country slow down?
It is the ultimate uncomfortable truth of this transition.
The data is stark. During the brutal, highly unequal military dictatorship, where the poor were actively exploited, Brazil's economic growth significantly outpaced the world average.
But during the 20 years of beautiful, massive social progress, democratic inclusion, and middle-class expansion,
Economic growth consistently dropped below the world average. So what does this all mean?
are we doomed to choose between a fast-growing, evil society or a slow, stagnant, fair one? Is that the binary choice of humanity?
It's not a permanent binary choice, but it is a severe transitional tug-of-war.
To understand this growth paradox, we have to look at how an economy balances two competing forces: tax distortions and credit constraints.
Okay, let's break those down. Tax distortion is the drag on the economy, right?
Correct. High taxes are absolutely required to pay for all this massive welfare, universal health care, and social inclusion.
And when a government heavily taxes the productive, formal sectors of the economy to fund these programs, it inevitably discourages some level of corporate investment.
It slows down the engine of capital accumulation. That is the tax distortion pulling overall GDP growth down.
And the credit constraint, how does that pull growth up?
A credit constraint is what happens when a brilliant, hardworking, poor person cannot participate in the economy because they have no collateral.
Imagine a poor teenager with the intellect to become a world-class software engineer, but they can't get a loan to buy a computer or go to college.
Their potential is entirely locked up, wasted. From an economic standpoint, that is a massive loss of human capital.
When a country redistributes wealth to the poor through cash transfers or public education, it relieves those credit constraints.
You unlock human capital.
Suddenly, that teenager can get an education, invent a new technology, and start a business. That force pushes the economy up.
So you have the heavy anchor of high taxes pulling the economy down and the newly unlocked human potential pushing it up.
Exactly. Right now, during this long phase of dissipative inclusion, the two forces are locked in a wrestling match.
The heavy tax burden in Brazil has a massive tax burden, on par with highly developed European nations. But acting on a developing economy is causing severe, immediate drag.
The friction of the participatory councils, the messy land reforms, the bloated bureaucracy, all of this acts as a tax on efficiency.
Hence, the aggregate growth rate dips below the world average.
But the authors don't believe this stagnation is permanent, do they?
No, the core thesis is that relieving credit constraints, unlocking the human capital of millions of people who were previously invisible to the economy, is a long-term generational play.
It takes 20 or 30 years for a newly educated, healthy middle class to mature.
To start innovating, file patents, and build complex businesses.
The tax distortions hit the economy immediately, causing the visible slowdown. But the massive human capital unlocked by inclusion will eventually tip the scales.
The temporary stagnation is a necessary incubation period for long-term, sustainable prosperity.
Which perfectly brings us to the final piece of this puzzle, the policy matrix and the future of the global contract.
Let's zoom out from Brazil and look at the globe today.
The paper plots different countries on an incredibly insightful matrix to help us understand where the world is heading.
Imagine a simple graph where the vertical axis is economic efficiency and the horizontal axis is social inclusion.
It's a brilliant way to map global political systems. Let's look at the bottom left quadrant, low efficiency, low inclusion.
The authors call this inefficient extractive.
I look at that and immediately think of a state like North Korea.
Precisely. A tiny, powerful elite extracts all the wealth, the vast majority of the population is entirely excluded, and the economy itself is a dysfunctional disaster.
Now look at the top left quadrant. High efficiency, low inclusion.
Growth-promoting authoritarian.
This is the classic Chinese model over the last few decades, or Brazil during its military dictatorship.
The economy grows incredibly fast. Infrastructure is built overnight, but political power and the vast majority of the wealth are tightly controlled by an exclusive elite.
The system is efficient, but it leaves millions behind.
Then we have the bottom right quadrant, low efficiency, high inclusion.
Populist inclusion. This feels like Argentina during its various populist waves, or even Brazil immediately after the 1988 Constitution.
Politicians promise the moon, they print money to hand out generous benefits, the people feel incredibly included for a brief euphoric moment.
But the total lack of economic efficiency leads to hyperinflation and inevitable collapse.
And finally, the holy grail, the top right quadrant, high efficiency, high inclusion.
Efficient inclusion. This is the Scandinavian model. High taxes, massive social safety nets, almost zero extreme poverty.
But incredibly efficient, transparent bureaucracies and highly competitive, globally innovative private sectors.
So the ultimate question is, where does Brazil fit into this matrix? How does a country move from authoritarian growth to efficient inclusion?
The paper places Brazil right in the middle in a sprawling transition zone they define entirely as dissipative inclusion.
They're trying to move from the top left toward the top right, but you cannot draw a clean, straight line between those 2 points.
To get to Scandinavia, you have to wade through the incredibly messy, inefficient, high-friction middle.
And this is the core takeaway for anyone analyzing systemic change today. You cannot cleanly fix a complex country.
Whether you are looking at a developing nation transitioning to democracy or looking at the political gridlock in your own hometown.
True, lasting systemic change requires accepting massive friction, political exhaustion, and painful compromises.
The temporary inefficiency, the endless arguments at the town hall, the bloated budgets, they aren't bugs in the software.
They're the optimal, perhaps the only realistic solutions for maintaining peace when you are actively tearing up an old, exploitative contract.
If you demand a perfectly clean, frictionless revolution, history shows you will either get an authoritarian nightmare or a populist, hyperinflationary collapse.
Dissipative inclusion, with all its flaws and wasted energy, is the only realistic toll road to a fairer society.
It is a profoundly sobering view of political economy, but ultimately a deeply hopeful one.
It tells us not to despair when democracy looks slow, messy, and maddeningly inefficient.
That mess is the literal sound of a new social contract being forged.
We have traveled an immense distance today.
We really have.
We started by dismantling the myth of the median voter, proving that wealth, not just headcount, dictates the rules.
We walk through the soul-crushing daily reality of 1,050% hyperinflation.
Where the poor watch their survival melt away while the rich hedge their bets.
And we explored the bloody, bureaucratic, but deeply necessary reality of dissipative inclusion.
We've seen how mathematical deadweight losses force the rich to cling to power.
And how profound psychological trauma, the fear of exclusion and the terror of inflation can actually force a divided nation to forge a dual belief system.
One that finally prioritizes both fairness and fiscal reality.
Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought to chew on.
The paper explicitly shows us that a social contract only truly changes when a massive systemic shock alters the foundational beliefs of the population.
Right now, look at your own society.
The foundational belief of the 20th century that hard work guarantees a better life and a home for your family is actively fracturing.
It is buckling under the weight of AI disruption, automation, severe housing crises, and relentless cost of living spikes.
If the compounding traumas of the 2020s are fundamentally shifting our core beliefs about what is fair and what is even mathematically possible.
What terrifying, beautiful, and utterly messy era of dissipative inclusion is waiting for us on the other side?
What toll are we going to have to pay to write our next contract?
It is the defining question for the next generation of voters and policymakers.
When the old rules no longer produce the promised results, the friction of rewriting them is unavoidable.
When the blueprint changes, the ground shakes.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the hidden contracts governing your own life, because as we've seen today, the rules are never as frozen as they appear.
Just remember, when the political machinery grinds and the societal friction heats up, you're not witnessing the end of the world.
You're just entering the murky, messy, incredibly vital waters of a system reboot. Stay curious.